Real quick, before we get into the show, I wanted to share a new service called Getita that Ken and I have been using that has made us over $10,000 in Amazon reimbursements. The service requires no monthly subscription, and Getita collects a small percentage of the money they recover for you. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up and works on all Amazon marketplaces. Go to Getita.com, Getida, and enter promo code FTM400. That's FTM for Firing the Man 400 to get your first $400 in reimbursements commission free. How much money does Amazon owe you?
I can't tell you how many times somebody puts their business for sale when the trend is going down, whether it's a revenue perspective or their margins or something like that. And now the opposite, if you look at it from the opposite side, you would say, well, gosh, if my business is going up like this, why would I want to sell? When your business is going up like this, that is when you should consider selling, because there's not always a guarantee that it's going to always keep on going in that direction. We're building this society. We oftentimes say if an Amazon mastermind and an aggregator were to have a baby, it would equal Society Brands, because it's kind of the best of both worlds. We're building this culture, this community of entrepreneurs where they're going to be able to share best practices with each other. We're going to have conferences. We're going to get together. We're going to build relationships that last a lifetime. If you want to do something right, you got to do it yourself, right? And that phrase is how small business mentality oftentimes is if they're not trying to scale, right? But if you're trying to grow a business to exponential levels, you can't just do it by yourself. You have to have a team around you.
Welcome everyone to the Firing the Man podcast, a show for anyone who wants to be their own boss. If you sit in a cubicle every day and know you are capable of more, then join us. This show will help you build a business and grow your passive income streams in just a few short hours per day. And now your hosts, serial entrepreneurs David Schomer and Ken Wilson.
Welcome, everyone, to the Firing the Man podcast. On today's episode, we have the pleasure of interviewing Michael Sirpilla, the CEO of Society Brands, which just went through a $205 million capital raise with the I-80 Group. If you have tuned into the show in the last year, there's a good chance you have heard Ken and I discuss the growth and performance of aggregators. We are very excited to have Michael on the show to discuss his entrepreneurial ventures, the landscape of e-commerce, and Society Brands' unique way of structuring an acquisition. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Yeah, David, thanks so much for having me. And I just got to say, I really appreciate what you're doing on Firing the Man. I think it's certainly really cool. So it's an honor to be here.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So let's start with a little bit about your background and what led you to becoming the CEO of Society Brands.
Yeah, so a little bit about me. Grew up in a retail family. I'm from Canton, Ohio, here in Northeast Ohio, home of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So if anybody out there is ever visiting Canton, feel free to reach out to me and love to be able to meet up. We've actually taken some of our sellers through the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which is actually kind of a cool experience. But yeah, so grew up in retail, grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. So I was really fortunate to come from a family of entrepreneurs. My grandfather started an RV dealership, 50, 60, could be 70 years ago at this point. And I just grew up in the retail space, and it was really interesting watching his business. And ever since then, I've been in and around entrepreneurship. Early in my career, I built a few multi-million-dollar wholesale agencies. I also built a population health management company from zero to a little bit under $150 million a year in sales. And that kind of brought me into Society Brands. And it was at the end of 2020 when I looked at the retail marketplace and saw like a lot of brick and mortar retailers shut down due to COVID. And I asked myself a simple question. I was like, is there going to be more or less products bought online 10 years from now than what there is today? And I think that the answer that I came up with was a really smart one. I think there's going to be more stuff bought online 10 years from now than today. So I knew the next phase of life for me was to do a consolidation and roll up. My brother, Justin, was actually in the midst of performing a roll up in another industry. It was in the payroll processing space, where he did 26 M&A transactions, a lot of EBITDA that he was able to acquire within that time. Prior to that, he did some consolidation in the manufacturing space as well. And I was always fascinated with growing through acquisition was a really unique strategy, and you can really accelerate your growth as you grow through acquisition. So my brother and I would always talk shop, and we'd always talk about essentially what it would be like to do a roll up in some sort of industry, and looked at the e-commerce space and saw how many sellers there were, right? There's millions of these third-party sellers on Amazon, millions of sellers on Shopify. So we kind of looked at that. And prior to Justin getting involved at Society Brands, now I'm the CEO, Justin's our president, I started building a team around me. And my uncle, who is also actually a co-founder at Society Brands, he introduced me to Sean Doherty, who was actually the founder of a tech company by the name of Mophie. So she sold over $1 billion of products on e-commerce. She sold her Mophie products in 130 different countries, 30,000 different retail doors, and built it to a really large business. And Johnny introduced me to Sean, and I shared about my vision about Society Brands, and at the time, it was NCAP 33, and how we would do things in a different way than what other aggregators were doing them. Just never been in my DNA personally to do things the same way. I like to try to find a unique value proposition to where maybe we're not the perfect fit for everybody, but there's certainly a niche or a demographic that Society Brands would relate to that maybe wouldn't be relatable to other aggregators. And that was really for having the founders stay on board. I'm sure that we're going to get into kind of our strategy here in a little bit, but that's really kind of how we got started is COVID kind of accelerated consumers' buying patterns online. And after knowing that this was the industry that I wanted to get into, then it's all about getting the right team in place. And I think that anybody can have success generally, but you need to make sure that you have the right people in place. So that was step number 2. And then step number 3 was kind of hitting the market and sharing our story to see if our unique value proposition in the marketplace was something that sellers would be able to relate to. So kind of brings us slightly to where we are today, just a really accelerated version of it.
Well, very nice. Very nice. A couple of things I want to dig into on that. You mentioned you came from an entrepreneurial family. What was maybe one of your first entrepreneurial ventures? Was it a lemonade stand? Was it mowing lawns? What are some early memories there?
So my first entrepreneurial venture was probably when I was a kid, and a friend of mine wanted to essentially sell baseball cards that he had in his room. And I was like, I'll tell you what, I'll help you sell your baseball cards and I'll split the profits with you 50-50. And it worked out great for me, right? Because I didn't have to pay for the baseball cards, right? It was a win-win. I went out and sold the baseball cards, and it was a win for my friend because he didn't have to go out there and sell baseball cards. A lot of people would do a lemonade stand. I was selling baseball cards on the side of the road. And that was probably the first entrepreneurial venture. Made a couple bucks, but nothing to write home about for sure.
Very nice. Very nice. And the second thing I wanted to dig into as it relates to your response is just in prepping for this interview, have read a lot about your team. And I want to talk about that team building because it really seems like you have assembled like a major league team, right? No minor league players. So how exactly did you go about that?
A lot of it is like looking at yourself as an entrepreneur and saying like, what are the areas of expertise I have? But then you also need to look at yourself as an entrepreneur and say, what are the areas that I'm weak in? Or what are areas that maybe I'm not super strong in? I think that the way that a lot of small business owners stay small, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with small business. I came from small business, but you've probably heard the phrase of, if you want to do something right, you got to do it yourself, right? And that phrase is how small business mentality oftentimes is if they're not trying to scale, right? But if you're trying to grow a business to exponential levels, you can't just do it by yourself. You have to have a team around you. So you've got to be humble as an entrepreneur as well. Like it's kind of finding this balance between, if you're too humble, you can kind of get down to the level of insecurity, right? And that's obviously not a good thing. But if you're too confident in yourself, you can get on the side of arrogance. And that's obviously not a good thing. So trying to find that balance between being confident in your abilities, but also being humble, I think is a really fine line that a lot of entrepreneurs need to try to find a way to balance those two. And for myself, I knew what I was really good at. And I also knew the areas that I needed to fill. So really before starting, I went to my network and started talking to other people who had e-commerce expertise, supply chain expertise, M&A expertise, finance expertise, and started slowly but surely putting together a team. And, today we've got, myself as the CEO, we've got Justin, my brother, as our president. And unfortunately, our mom had some kind of health issues. And that was a situation where Justin was wanting to move back home to Ohio. So he ended up moving from Alpharetta, Georgia, back to Ohio. He saw what we were doing at Society Brands, and Justin had a ton of M&A expertise. And having that skill set of what he has was something that our business really needed. So Justin's our president. Sean is our COO. Already explained a little bit of background on her. And we also have our CFO, Jordan Triesenberg, who was actually the VP of Finance at Mofi previously. So he came on board with us. We have a Chief Product Officer. The very first acquisition that we made, David, was an Amazon brand management agency. Again, to kind of further just elaborate in the human capital aspect of things. We thought that buying an agency would make a lot of sense for us, because if an Amazon agency has a track record of growing their managed brands that they're servicing, if you kind of copy and paste a lot of the methodology that they use to grow from a service-based perspective, we copy and paste that into our acquired brands, we should be able to get similar results. We ended up acquiring OmniX, our brand management agency, and John Collins was the founder and CEO of OmniX. He ended up coming on board as our chief marketing officer. His wife, Stormy, came on board as our chief of staff. Then we got several of his team members. And they were growing brands at 40% year over year growth, and they were managing hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue on Amazon. So we're like, okay, they have this Thrive growth strategy on how to grow brands. Let's just copy and paste that to our acquired brands. And we should be able to get similar results. It's not exactly the same, but we should be able to get similar results. And so that was another aspect of our growth from a human capital side, was really an Acme hire. Finding an agency that we could essentially acquire. And if I start going down the list of names, we've got a lot of team members today. I know that somebody's going to watch this podcast and be like, hey, you forgot to mention my name. But we've got a great team, and it's just all about looking at it almost like it's a puzzle that you're trying to piece together and trying to find all the puzzle pieces.
Very nice. Very nice. And I have to say, when I was reading up on the acquisition of that agency, that to me was a brilliant move. And I'll go back to the Prosper Show in 2021. There's probably 60 aggregators there. And after we had a couple businesses we were looking to sell, and after talking to a lot of aggregators, it kind of felt like there was an influx, like a lot of capital raising, not a ton of operators. And, we've had friends of the show that did end up selling. They had huge earnouts. And because of that lack of operators, things did not pan out for them. And so let's kind of turn the corner and talk about the surge of aggregators. I would say when I got into this,
real quick, just to mention something before you pivot, because what you mentioned there was really important. Like, I think that there's some aggregators that feel like Amazon is easier than what it is. And by the way, there's so many aggregators that we respect out there, right? So many that we look up to. But we've always taken the approach that Amazon is not easy. And so making sure that we have truly a rock star team is something that was honestly first and foremost. It wasn't raising capital first. It wasn't finding acquisitions first. It was really making sure that we got that team dialed in. So yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And sometimes it kind of helps to think that, like, hey, this is going to be hard. You set that bar high. That way, when you over prepare for it, once you're in that position to start operating, you could actually have a lot of success. Unfortunately, that's where we're at today. So. Yeah,
absolutely. No, we're both in agreement on that. Amazon is its own unique beast. And in terms of managing and running an Amazon business, it's like learning a new language. So anyway, let's talk about this surge of aggregators coming into the e-commerce space. I will say maybe 5 years ago, I was not even, as I was building my company, I was thinking about the monthly cash flow that it would generate. I was not thinking about the asset that I was building. That has changed. But let's talk about why do you think there has been a rush to the e-commerce market?
So I think it's a few things. Whenever there's a highly fragmented industry it's ripe for some sort of consolidation. The unique thing here, like when Justin was involved as the head of M&A for this payroll processing company, this PEO, there was 700 possible acquisition targets to essentially acquire. In another industry that actually my uncle, Johnny Sirpilla, did a consolidation in was the RV space. He was the president of Camping World, and there was 2,400 acquisition targets. So here in this, again, millions of third-party sellers. So the reason why there's so many aggregators and the reason why there's enough room for this many aggregators is just because there's so many sellers. It's actually very, very, very fragmented. And that right there alone is going to cause people to consider doing some sort of a roll-up in the industry. I think another thing is, as I mentioned, starting off the call, David, it's the general trend of where consumers are going. Everybody can say without a shadow of a doubt that there's going to be more products bought online 10 years from now than what there is today. So since that's the way that it's going, and the fact that there's so many of these third-party sellers that are crushing it, a lot of which that listen to your podcast, David, I think that those are two reasons that make it really, really attractive. Another thing is the FBA program. The benefit of FBA is obviously Fulfillment by Amazon does a lot of the blocking and tackling for you. So from a scaling perspective, assuming that you've got a lot of the marketing and operations side of things dialed in, the fulfillment side, Amazon does an incredible job of helping with. So if I just kind of had to dial it down to three things, I'd say that those are probably the main things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You alluded to this, but I always felt that it's a better shopping experience. And I'll give an example of this microphone I'm talking into. When I decided to purchase this, I could have gone to Best Buy and talked to a salesman who likely had not ever used this microphone. However, when I buy it on Amazon, I can read thousands of people that bought this exact model and are giving feedback on this exact model. And that is something I don't think brick and mortar will ever be able to compete with. And when you look at most products, you can wait 2 days and it's convenient. And so, yeah, I would say, and I'm curious, I would say if e-commerce is a baseball game, we're in the third inning. That's my opinion. I'm curious what your thought is.
I would even argue the first inning,
really,
because if you still see what percentage consumers are still buying in retail versus e-commerce, still a vast majority is buying products in retail. And I think that trend is going to continue to keep on moving. But I think that when you think of even the aggregator space, so to speak, I think that we're probably in the first inning because the marketplace, there's more and more sellers that are always coming on the marketplace too. So it's, between the first and the third inning, I think that those are probably fair guesses. When Society Brands got launched, we were very aware that there were other aggregators that launched in 2018, 2019. That never really concerned us very much. It didn't concern us because it's such a big marketplace and it's growing. So to know that what things are going to look like 5 years or 10 years from now, we are very much in the early stages of something really special for Amazon sellers, then also hopefully aggregators like Society Brands.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now let's dive into Society Brands. And you guys have a very unique acquisition strategy, and I'd like to dive into that.
Yeah. So Society Brands, the reason why we named the company Society Brands is we're building a culture, community, an ecosystem, a society of entrepreneurs that post-acquisition, they get to enjoy liquidity, but they also get to stay on board with their brand. A lot of aggregators talk about proprietary deals, basically meaning that businesses that are not listed through business brokers. A lot of the people that are listening to this podcast are probably not listed through a business broker today. And we love a lot of the brokers out there. They do a great service for their clients. But the problem sometimes when you're working with acquisition or sellers that aren't for sale is they're not necessarily ready to sell their business yet. They have an emotional tie to that. And if you think of a typical e-commerce entrepreneur, they're most of the time not somebody that's going to retire and sit on a beach somewhere for the next 30 or 40 years, right? So since that's the case anyway, we give the entrepreneur the ability to stay on board with their brand. They would sit as the brand president. So a lot of the role that they currently play for the brand, the only difference is instead of being tied in all the minutia, all the details, all the weeds of their business, they truly get to sit as a president of their brand. So they're the strategic vision. They're the tribal knowledge. I think that a lot of aggregators may not value the tribal knowledge that entrepreneur and that founder carry with that brand. And we do. The fact that if we're looking at a $2 million revenue business or a $5 million revenue business or some larger than that, and if they're growing by 20% year over year, they've got 25% profit margins, whatever it is, they've done something really, really well. And to keep that entrepreneur on board, and we should be able to see a very similar growth trend as to what it's been doing previously. And if we add our layers of expertise on top of that, I mean, collectively, my team sold over $2 billion of products online. It's not just on Amazon. So we can add to that versus ask the entrepreneur to step aside. And we then try to figure out all the things that entrepreneur figured out over the past several years. So that would be one thing where we're building this society. You oftentimes say if an Amazon mastermind and an aggregator were to have a baby, it would equal Society Brands, because it's kind of the best of both worlds. We're building this culture, this community of entrepreneurs where they're going to be able to share best practices with each other. We're going to have conferences. We're going to get together. We're going to build relationships that last a lifetime. That's what we all love about masterminds. But we are very much an aggregator. We're not just, mastermind, right? So like we're kind of a hybrid of those two things. I think another thing that makes us very, very unique is we offer sellers, as part of the consideration, equity in the Society Brands Topco. That is a very, very, very expensive proposition for us to offer to a seller. It's the reason why a lot of aggregators don't offer that. And they normally just do this cash at closing. They do this earnout structure, right? But we offer Topco equity. And the reason why is because we want to create a win-win scenario with our sellers. We want them to be able to share in what our upside will be when we end up having an IPO or some sort of liquidity event. So we still offer cash at closing, generally 70 to 80% cash at closing. And we can also do some sort of earnouts if that's what the founder wants. But what makes us really unique is we're offering equity in Society Brands. We're an early aggregator, right? It's not like we're valued at $10 billion today or $5 billion. So they get to get in on the ground floor at Society Brands. And we're going to build this thing to a multi-billion-dollar company over the next several years. And we're all going to be able to enjoy that second exit together. And I think that that's going to be a lot of fun. And, there could be some Wall Street guys that would say, why would you give away Topco equity? It's such an expensive deal term. I don't know, the numbers could get so big for Society Brands that for us to be able to share in that wealth with our sellers and also our employees as well, we just feel like it's a good thing for the business. And I think it's a unique value proposition that we're offering that I don't think a lot of other aggregators are.
Sorry to interrupt the episode. You may have heard Ken and I talking recently about a new tool that we're using for Amazon refunds. Now, I have used other refund tools like this. However, I can tell you in the first 7 days, they scrubbed the back end of my Amazon account going back 18 months and found $5,000 of refunds. And the nice thing about this is it's my money. Amazon made a mistake and they are just auditing my account. The other thing I really like about this tool is there is no monthly fee. They only charge a commission if they are successful in getting you your money. Go to Getida.com, Getida, and enter promo code FTM for Firing the Man, FTM400. This is an awesome tool. Can't say enough good things about it. Now, back to the episode. Absolutely. A couple things I want to touch on there that as somebody who's thinking about selling a business, it addresses some of my concerns. One, the first company I started, it is like my baby. My wife and I started it in our basement. We have a lot of memories tied up in this, so many mistakes, giving that baby away and never being able to interact with it again. There's some friction there and it's hard to explain, but there is. The second thing in that Topco equity, I really like it. And you've got your liquidity event, right? But you've also got a pool of e-commerce sellers that are all kind of working together for the common good. I like the name Society Brands. And I would think as, say, a president of an existing company, if they have a really, hey, I did my pallets this way and I saved 10% on shipping costs. Well, that, passing that knowledge on to the greater group is brilliant. And then I would say, lastly, if you're involved in e-commerce, it means you believe in e-commerce. And so in to go out and buy an ETF of Amazon businesses is, I don't know of one. And so this gives you an opportunity to diversify, but still be invested in something that you truly believe in. And so I really, really like that approach. Not that you asked me, but after having a lot of conversations with aggregators, it addresses some pain points that I haven't heard before.
Yeah, it's something, rollover equity in society, Topco equity in a roll-up is not uncommon in other industries. I just don't think it's very common in this industry. I actually talked to a friend of mine, and this was kind of how I came up with the idea of how we were going to do this. He sold his insurance agency, and he sold it for $27 million. And it was a large roll-up in the insurance financial services realm. They paid him $20 million cash at close. And then they paid him $7 million into the parent company's equity pool. And fast forward 2.5 years later, that $7 million is now worth $81 million for my buddy. So if you think of the total value, he got $100 million of value so far. And he stayed on board with that company, right? And he was able to enjoy immense amount of upside. He's going to enjoy a much larger liquidity event than what he ever would have in a million years if he would have just sold his siloed insurance agency as a standalone. So it created a unique structure. And I was like, you know what? That sounds like such a win-win scenario that I think it would work out really well in the e-commerce space. Unfortunately, so far it's been working out. It's been working out great. So,
well, good. Very nice. Very nice. Now, what would be, to establish a strike zone for Society Brands? What types of companies are you looking, or would make a good partner in terms of revenue, profit margin, number of products, et cetera?
Yeah, so generally product and industry agnostic at this time. Whenever me and my team talk about getting really narrow, we end the conversation with staying really wide, at least at this time anyway. And as far as revenue size, over $1 million a year revenue we'll look at. We like to see at least 15% profit margins. And we like to see businesses that have strong year-over-year growth. We understand that due to the supply chain issues, that's tougher to see today than what it was maybe a couple of years ago. But that's generally the outline of what we look at. We don't need to always buy brands that are the number one in their category. They could be number 5 or 10. As long as our marketing team has conviction that we can get them higher up in the category, it could be a win for us. So could get more into detail as to what we look for, but like at a super high level, that's what we look for.
Okay. What about numbers of products? And I'll give you an example of kind of what I'm talking about. We have a portfolio company that has around 300 products. I would consider them base hits. They sell a couple hundred units a month, and that's how that business is made up. We have another portfolio company that has a small number of products, but sells several thousand a month. In terms of revenue, these are equivalent, but definitely managed differently. So do you guys have any preference on kind of like
so we've looked at both, and there's pros and cons, I think, to both. I think that like generally when you're acquiring many businesses and we're not looking to acquire hundreds within the next few years. We're looking to acquire 12 to 15 companies a year is essentially what we're looking at. And so we tend to get somewhat picky on really what we're looking for, because it's not just about the business. It's also to make sure that the founder is a good culture fit for us. But even so, when you're growing through acquisition, you need to make sure that the operational burden that's being placed on Society Brands or any aggregator isn't so overwhelming. We generally like to see efficient revenue. At least $100,000 per SKU is generally how we like to look at things. But we're also a little bit more flexible than maybe most aggregators are from the perspective of we have that founder staying on board. If they have certain team members on board already, VAs, maybe they have a couple employees, we would keep those people on board as well. So just a little bit different from then if somebody has hundreds of SKUs and the aggregator doesn't have a need for the founder or those team members. Maybe they're looking for really efficient revenue. But since we are asking for the team members to stay on board, we're also asking for the entrepreneur to stay on board. That helps our operational burden a little bit.
Okay. Very nice. So to our listeners that are looking to exit their business in the next 12 to 24 months, what advice would you give them?
So the best advice I think that I can give to an entrepreneur that's looking to sell their business is make sure that your company's growing. And that sounds like a super, super obvious answer, but I can't tell you how many times somebody puts their business for sale when the trend is going down, whether it's a revenue perspective or their margins or something like that. And now the opposite, if you look at it from the opposite side, you would say, well, gosh, if my business is going up like this, why would I want to sell? When your business is going up like this, that is when you should consider selling, because there's not always a guarantee that it's going to always keep on going in that direction. And that's also when you're going to be able to most likely get the best price too, right? So I would say that number one, make sure that your business is growing and make sure that your profit margins are in a really, really good spot as well. Those are the two main things. We can kind of get into like products and just operationalizing your business. But I would say that if your business is growing by 20, 30, 40% year over year, and you could show that, and if you have really healthy profit margins, I think that you're going to have certainly some interested buyers.
Very good. Very good. I like all of those points. And the growth piece is really interesting in that when times get tough, people may think, well, let's unload this, right? And so it's interesting from the buyer's perspective that is, makes a big deal. So I'm curious, and I always like to talk to people with a lot of deal experience. Any unique stories about a deal that's been killed? Or are there any circumstances that if they were to arise would kill a deal?
Are you saying a situation like if this happens, then it would kill a deal?
Yeah.
So one thing that's just really tough is that kills deals is black hat. Like if there's one thing that we know is we want to abide by Amazon's terms of service, right? And knowing that Amazon has the keys to the car of if they can shut down an account or not. When you're an acquirer and you have millions of dollars go out the door, and knowing that just like that, it could get shut down, that's really concerning. So obviously that's something that like when we go through a diligence process, we diligence against, because that's probably the one thing that could literally halt that brand in its tracks right away. And I would also say a second thing is like if we catch the founder lying to us about one thing or another, and you kind of think you could like hide these little things, like, listen, no business is perfect, right? So no business is perfect. Just be honest with us as to what's going on and know that the aggregator is probably going to find out about the situation anyway. You could either volunteer that and expedite them to the process of finding out about whatever it is, or you could try to hide it. If you try to hide it, there's a good chance they find out anyway, and then you kind of lost your trust and rapport with them, and that could really hurt a deal. Another thing that really hurts deals is you list your business for sale, or you get under an LOI with an aggregator, and then you take your eye off your business, and then your business starts sliding backwards. And then it's going down 15%, 20% year over year from you look at the month of June versus last year's June, right? And those things are really concerning. And just know that the aggregator is most likely going to be looking at your financials all the way through close, even though the price was based off of maybe 2 months ago what your TTM was, right? They're going to keep on looking at it. And if your business is trending downwards, they're either going to back out or there's going to be a price adjustment.
Very good. Now to kind of recap some of my key takeaways there, glad you mentioned the black hat, because that's how we run our business. We tell all of our employees a clean conscience is a comfortable pillow. And it is, you're right. Amazon can flip that switch when you break the rules, and it's hard enough just abiding by the terms of service, let alone, doing sketchy things to get reviews or whatever. Another thing you mentioned was honesty. And I think especially with your business model, if you're going to let somebody into the society, they need to be honest and upfront with you. And the last thing was keep your hands on the wheel. And once you have an LOI, keep running the business and don't go to the beach yet. So, well, very good. Well, next part of the show is our fire round. And this is questions that we ask all of our guests at the end of the podcast. Ready to go?
I'm ready.
All right. What is your favorite book?
How to Win Friends and Influence People.
A classic. Very nice. What are your hobbies?
Golf. Actually, family first, then golf.
Of course. Very nice. Very nice. What is one thing that you do not miss about working for the man?
Not having the flexibility of creating whatever I feel on my heart to create.
Okay. And what do you think sets apart successful e-commerce entrepreneurs from those who give up, fail, or never get started?
I think it's commitment. When I decided to start Society Brands, I was committed to making sure that it was a success. It was going to be a success, or I was going to die trying. And I think that some people that start off in entrepreneurship kind of step in 1 foot in, 1 foot out. They think they could do it. They'll only keep on going if they're successful. If it's easy, they'll keep on going. Know that entrepreneurship is never going to be easy. You're always going to run into roadblocks. And if you set that expectation first, then you just ask yourself, am I committed to it or not? I love what Jeff Bezos said. I watched an interview of him, and he was making a ton of money on Wall Street, I believe. Don't quote me if I'm wrong, but he was in finance from some perspective, and he had a wife and kids, and he was doing really, really well and making really solid money. And he had this idea of creating Amazon. And he asked himself if he should stay in finance or if he should start this vision that he had of Amazon. And what he did is he fast forwarded his life to when he was an 80-year-old person. And he asked himself, if I'm 80 years old, and if I didn't do this, if I didn't try to create this Amazon concept that I have, would I regret it? And he said, yes, I absolutely would regret it. And then he asked himself, what happens if I tried it and I absolutely failed miserably? When I'm 80 years old, would I regret that? And he said, no, he wouldn't have regretted that if that would have ended up being the outcome, because at least he gave it everything that he possibly could. And that's what I believe. It's like you're either fully committed or you're not. And do not try to go into something half-hearted. You either need to go all in or all out. And for me at Society Brands, we're all in. We really love what we're doing. We've got a really strong team. And so I think if you're going to be successful in e-commerce or any entrepreneur endeavor, I would say commit with everything that you have.
I like it. Those are 4 really good responses. That was a good fire round. Well, Michael, I want to thank you for being a guest on the Firing the Man podcast. If one of our listeners listens to this podcast and wants to, is interested in connecting with Society Brands, what would be the best way?
Yeah, so you can go to our website. It's societybrands.com. So www.societybrands.com. And if you click the Join the Society button, you'll be able to book a call with us. And we'd love to chat with you.
All right. Very nice. And we'll post links to all of that in the show notes. Michael, thank you so much for your time and looking forward to staying in touch.
Great. Thanks so much, David. Appreciate everything.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's Firing the Man podcast. If you like this episode, head on over to firingtheman.com and check out our resource library for exclusive Firing the Man discounts on popular e-commerce subscription services. That is firingtheman.com/resource. You can also find a comprehensive library of over 50 books that Ken and I have read in the last few years that have made a meaningful impact on our business. For that, head on over to www.firingtheman.com/library. Lastly, check us out on social media at Firing the Man and on YouTube at Firing the Man for exclusive content. This is David Schomer.
And Ken Wilson.
We're out. Before you go, we wanted to share a new service that Ken and I have been using called Getita that has made us over $10,000 in Amazon reimbursements. The service requires no monthly subscription, and Getita collects a small percentage of the money they recover for you. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up and works on all Amazon marketplaces. Go to Getita.com, Getida.com, and enter promo code FTM400. That's FTM for Firing the Man 400 to get your first $400 in reimbursements commission free. How much money does Amazon owe you?